As 536 began in earnest, life appeared as ordinary as it had for generations. The fields still stretched green across valleys, dotted with thatched cottages. The rivers flowed calmly, reflecting sunlight. The wind moved through trees in soft, comforting patterns. Birdsong filled the air. And yet beneath the surface, subtle changes were stirring. Even the faintest signs of strangeness could not disturb daily life. Farmers noticed wheat growing a little slower, barley shorter than before. Merchants in Constantinople saw some scarcity in the marketplace. Monks in distant monasteries recorded unusual celestial phenomena, though the meaning escaped them. Life's rhythm continued, unbroken. Children played. Shepherds watched flocks, bakers baked, fires burned warmly in homes. And humans trusted that tomorrow would bring the same light. The same hope, the same ordinary day. The fragile web of human life was a delicate balance. Communities relied on food, water, shelter, and each other. They depended on seasonal cycles, predictable weather, and reliable sunlight. They depended on trade networks and political stability. Even small disruptions could ripple outward. A poor harvest in one region might mean scarcity in another. A disease in one village could slowly spread along trade routes. Yet the people of early 536 remained largely unaware of these risks. And perhaps this unawareness is part of what makes their story so haunting. They lived fully in the ordinary, even as extraordinary hardship was approaching. The importance of ordinary life before the sun dimmed and famine spread. Before the plague arrived, the ordinary was all that existed. It was the smell of bread baking, the warmth of a fire, the soft lowing of cattle, the laughter of children, the gentle rhythm of seasons, and the comfort of community. And in this ordinary life, humans found hope. They planned for the future. They loved. They struggled. They survived. Yet all of this ordinary, comforting, familiar was about to be tested. The linger of calm. Imagine a world still untouched by famine, plague, or darkness. Imagine a farmer resting after a long day, a monk copying a manuscript by candlelight, a merchant counting coins in the marketplace, children chasing each other across village lanes. The calm is deceptive. It is ordinary, comforting, and fragile. And yet, it allows us, as observers, to fully appreciate what is coming. Soon the sun will dim, the crops will fail, the air will chill, and the world as people knew it will begin to crumble. But for now, we linger in this calm. We breathe with the ordinary world. We watch the rhythm of life continue, unbroken yet quietly on the edge of change, and as we breathe, we prepare ourselves to follow history into its darkest moments, to step gently into 536. The year the sun dimmed, the crops failed, and the world grew cold. The year 536 began with ordinary days, yet the world was already beginning to shift. At first the changes were subtle, almost imperceptible, like a soft murmur at the edge of hearing. The sun rose each morning, as it always had, yet its light was pale, subdued, as if filtered through a thin veil. It lacked the warmth and brilliance that people relied upon. The sky, usually bright and comforting, took on a dull gray hue. Days felt shorter, cooler, and somehow heavier. For farmers, this was troubling. Seeds that normally sprouted vigorously now pushed through soil slowly, struggling. The young shoots seemed fragile, almost hesitant, as though sensing a change in the air. Even those who tilled the fields with care and dedication began to worry. Early observations across Europe, chroniclers recorded unusual phenomena. In Ireland, monks wrote of a failure of bread and unseasonable cold. In the eastern Mediterranean, scribes noted that the sun appeared dim and colorless, giving no warmth. In China, astronomers observed strange solar patterns. At first, these observations were small, almost easy to ignore. People adapted by layering clothing, adjusting planting times, and hoping the season would correct itself. But slowly, day by day, the dimming persisted. And with it, a quiet unease began to spread through villages, towns, and cities alike. The physical experience. Imagine standing in a field one morning in 536. The sun rises, but its light feels weak. Shadows are faint and distinct. The warmth that usually touches your skin is missing, leaving a chill that settles deep into bones. The air carries a strange dryness or perhaps a subtle dampness depending on the region. Birds sing less enthusiastically. Animals graze with unusual stillness, people noticed. Merchants complained that fruits and vegetables ripened unevenly. Farmers feared poor harvests. And yet, life continued. Each day blended into the next, marked by the faint, fading light of the dim sun. The emotional landscape the dimming sun affected more than crops and animals. It affected humans. Light influences mood. When the sun fades, people feel a quiet melancholy, a subtle fatigue, a sense of unease. Communities began to whisper about strange omens. Priests interpreted the dim sky as divine displeasure. Children asked questions adults could not answer. In Constantinople, people noticed that the city felt colder, less vibrant. Markets continued, but the atmosphere carried unease. Merchants, accustomed to abundance, feared scarcity. Soldiers, who trained daily, found the chill slowing their movements. The world felt off balance. The spread of the veil. What caused this? Dimming? Today, scientists understand that massive volcanic eruptions sent ash high into the stratosphere. The particles drifted across continents, forming a veil that blocked sunlight. Temperatures dropped. Crops struggled to grow. The skies appeared gray for over a year. In 536, of course, people did not know this. They could see only the sun's weak glow and feel the cold creeping into their lives. They could hear the whisper of the wind and see the hesitation of plants, struggling to grow. And they could feel, though they did not yet understand, the slow shift of the world beneath their feet. Daily life in dimming light life continued. Yet every ordinary task took on a new weight. Farmers worked harder, worrying that their efforts might fail. Merchants checked stock more carefully, fearing scarcity. Families ate more cautiously, rationing food to avoid waste. Children played, but the laughter carried a hint of melancholy. Reflecting the muted sunlight. Evenings became longer in perception, though clocks did not exist as we know them. The faint light lingered, casting long gray shadows across homes and streets. Firelight became more essential, not only for warmth, but for comfort. Communities gathered near hearths, sharing stories and attempting to reassure themselves that the world remained safe. Even in the calm of ordinary days, life carried quiet uncertainties. A farmer planting seeds could not control the rain. A merchant could not control the whims of distant kings. A sailor could not control the winds at sea. And yet humans found ways to live with these uncertainties. Villages were small and tightly knit. Neighbors shared tools, advice, food. Stories traveled from one household to another, stories of past famines, past wars, past strange events in the sky. Those stories were comforting, a reminder that even when disaster came, people survived. And in 535, the people still felt safe. The cities were larger, busier, and more complex. Byzantium streets were paved with stone. The aroma of roasted meats and sweet spices filled the air. Artisans carved statues and painted frescoes in quiet workshops. Priests maintained rituals. Markets remained orderly. Soldiers trained, ready for battle, yet mostly at peace. Even the seas seemed calm. Fishermen cast their nets into familiar waters. Ships carried goods, travelers, and news between distant lands. Trade connected the Mediterranean to the Black Sea, India, and beyond. The world was interconnected, yet still small enough that a pale sun over Europe could not yet disturb the lives of people across Asia or the Americas. Life as a slow rhythm daily life in 536, before the veil of darkness fell, can be imagined as a slow, measured rhythm. Morning, sunlight filters through windows, casting soft light on floors and walls. People rise, dress, and begin work. The smell of baked bread drifts through streets and villages. Animals stir in pens, goats and sheep bleating softly. Midday, the sun, high in the sky, warms the earth. Farmers rest in the shade, sipping water, listening to distant birds. Children nap or play quietly near their homes. Markets buzz with gentle activity. Evening, the sun begins to set. Firelight glows in homes. Families gather to eat, to tell stories, to pray. The stars begin to appear in the night sky. Night, all is quiet. The world sleeps. The rhythm repeats itself tomorrow, unchanged, comforting. And this rhythm was precious. It was the invisible structure that gave life meaning and security. It was the measure by which people judged their days. And soon it would be broken. Human hope and trust. People of this era had hope not in a distant abstract sense, but in the tangible daily reassurance that the earth and sky were reliable. They trusted that the sun would rise tomorrow. They trusted that the rains would come at the right time. They trusted that crops would grow. They trusted that the world was dependable, even when life was hard. This trust shaped behavior. It dictated when to plant, when to harvest, when to travel, when to pray. It allowed people to plan, to dream, to love, and even when faced with small disasters, a storm, a poor harvest, their faith in continuity carried them through. But the coming year would test this trust in ways unimaginable. The sun would dim, crops would fail, famine would spread, and plague would follow. And yet, for now, in these quiet early months of 536, life remained ordinary. The rhythm continued. The sun still shone, though its glow would soon begin to fade. The wind still moved through the trees. The earth still provided sustenance. For the moment, a slow prelude to disaster, it is in the ordinary, in the calm, that the coming catastrophe feels most profound. Imagine walking through a village in Gaul. The streets are clean, children play. Dogs bark. The smell of bread and herbs hangs in the air. Now imagine that same village in a few months. The sky dimmed, the air colder, the crops failing, hunger rising. For now, however, this is only a prelude. We linger in the ordinary. We listen to the gentle hum of life. We watch the slow, measured motion of the world before it falters, and as we do, we can feel a sense of anticipation, not of fear, but of awareness. The calm before the storm is often the longest, the quietest, the most profound. Even in these ordinary days, there was a quiet beauty in life. The simple acts of survival, sowing seeds, tending animals, baking bread, carried their own rhythm and satisfaction. People found meaning in routine, a child learning to weave, a farmer watching sprouts break through soil, a merchant arranging goods in the market. Even small things, the way sunlight glinted on a river, the scent of fresh earth after rain. The hum of bees in a garden brought subtle comfort. The interconnected world, though travel was slow and communication limited, the world was interconnected. Merchants carried spices, salt, and cloth across seas and deserts. Messengers brought news from distant kings and emperors. Ideas traveled slowly, like clouds drifting across the sky. Stories of distant lands reached villages, inspiring curiosity. Hope or fear. In Byzantium, scholars copied texts of philosophy, science, and astronomy, preserving knowledge for future generations. In Persia, courts recorded historical events, governance, and natural phenomena. In China, astronomers charted celestial movements, noting unusual occurrences in the sky with meticulous care. Even in small villages, oral traditions passed wisdom and stories from one generation to the next. This web of human life, fragile yet resilient, created stability. People depended on each other. They relied on knowledge, community, and shared understanding. And it was this stability, this fragile web, that would soon be tested by forces far beyond human control. The rhythm of nature life was closely tied to nature. Seasons dictated action. Spring meant planting. Summer meant tending and watching growth. Autumn meant harvest and preparation for winter. Winter meant rest, reflection, and the occasional struggle against cold and scarcity. The sun was a constant guide. Its warmth and light measured time, inspired growth, and provided hope. Rivers flowed predictably. Mountains stood unmoving. The winds, though sometimes harsh, were familiar. In this ordinary harmony, humans felt comfort and security. They could not foresee that soon all would shift. The sun's glow would pale. The air would chill. The world would tilt just enough. to bring suffering on an unimaginable scale, subtle changes in the sky. Even as life continued, subtle signs began to appear. A pale morning sun, unusual shadows, a cool breeze lingering longer than expected. Farmers noticed sprouts growing slower than usual. Merchants saw patterns in trade disrupted by poor harvests. Scholars recorded strange celestial phenomena. These small observations were early warnings, though they went largely unheeded. To ordinary people, the changes were inconsequential, easily explained. And yet, they marked the beginning of a profound disruption, a slow-moving shadow that would soon darken the world, a world unaware. Consider the perspective of ordinary people. A mother in Gaul cooking bread over a small fire. A monk in Ireland illuminating manuscripts. A shepherd in Syria tending sheep. A child playing in Constantinople's streets. None of them could understand the global forces gathering. Volcanic ash drifted high into the stratosphere. Temperatures subtly dropped, sunlight diminished. And yet, daily life continued. This unawareness is part of what makes history so human. People live their lives, connected to the familiar, oblivious to distant forces beyond comprehension. And this is the moment we linger in, where life is ordinary, yet the future holds extraordinary hardship, the calm before catastrophe. The calm of early 536 is the longest chapter of all. It is quiet, ordinary, unremarkable. And in that quiet, we see the contrast to what is coming. The veil of darkness is approaching, but we pause to notice the laughter of children, the clatter of tools in workshops, the scent of bread baking, the soft cooing of doves, the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. These details matter. They are the textures of ordinary life, the threads that will be frayed by famine, plague, and cold. And as we pause, let us breathe with the world, slowly, gently, because the story is only beginning. And so, as the year 536 quietly approached, life continued much as it always had. Children played in dusty lanes, their laughter floating softly over fields and rooftops. Shepherds led flocks across rolling hills, their woolly charges grazing lazily in the pale sunlight. In villages and towns, bakers stirred dough with careful hands, shaping loaves to rise gently by the warmth of the fire. Markets buzzed with subdued energy. Merchants displayed dried fruits, salted fish, pottery, and linens. People exchanged goods, stories, and occasional gossip. Even in the bustling cities of Byzantium, Constantinople glimmered with organized chaos, crowds moving through marble streets, the aroma of spices mingling with incense, and the quiet murmur of devotion from nearby churches. But beyond the streets and fields, the world moved with invisible forces. Oceans lapped at distant shores, carrying traders, travelers, and messages across seas. The winds blew, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, over mountains, plains, and deserts. Birds followed migration paths, unaware of the subtle changes about to ripple across their skies. Life in this period, though simpler than ours today, had its own richness. People understood their place in the cosmos. They observed the stars, noting patterns and predicting seasons. They relied on the cycles of sun and rain to feed themselves, their families, and their communities. And most importantly, they trusted in continuity. The sun would rise. The moon would shine. The seasons would turn, and yet, slowly, imperceptibly, the threads of that continuity began to fray. The gentle introduction of strangeness, the first signs were subtle. Perhaps a morning where the sun seemed unusually pale. A farmer noticing that his wheat did not grow as tall as last year. A traveler remarking on an unseasonable chill in the air. Nothing catastrophic, just a faint sense that something had shifted. Historians, looking back, note these small observations. Monks in Ireland recorded the failure of bread with careful understatement, almost as if naming it might keep the worst at bay. In the eastern Mediterranean, chroniclers mentioned dim skies and strange weather patterns. Though their words carried no real alarm, people continued their daily routines, clinging to familiarity. They lit their fires, tended animals, and prepared for the next harvest. Uncertainty existed, but it was easily explained away. Another bad season, another unusual storm. The rhythm of life persisted, steady as ever. Though beneath it, change was gathering strength. Daily life and its fragility. Consider a typical day in a village somewhere in Gaul. The farmer rises before dawn. He dresses in rough linen and leather, pulls on his boots, and steps into the soft morning air. The chickens cluck near the door. The smell of earth, damp and cool, rises from the soil. He walks to the field, plow in hand, oxen waiting patiently. He turns the soil slowly, rhythmically, each furrow a small act of survival. The air carries the scent of hay and herbs. Distantly, the church bell tolls. People greet one another. Children laugh, chasing each other between cottages. The farmer pauses to wipe sweat from his brow. He looks up at the sun, still bright, still comforting, unaware that soon the very same sun will be dimmed by forces beyond comprehension. Across the continent, in Constantinople, life has a different texture. Merchants in flowing robes haggle over silk and spices. Artists paint mosaics in churches, small hands moving carefully over colored tiles. Soldiers train in courtyards, their boots clicking on stone. And above it all, the emperor dreams of empire, conquest, and glory. The calm before the darkness. It is important to linger in this calm, to allow the mind to rest in the normalcy of ordinary life. For much of history is like this, quiet, repetitive, unremarkable. And it is in this quiet that the contrast of catastrophe becomes profound. Imagine the gentle rhythm of the year 535 flowing into 536. The rhythm is predictable. The world seems stable, life continues. And then, almost imperceptibly, the veil begins to descend, the dimming of the sun, the failing of crops, the first whisper of famine. These things arrive slowly, softly, like shadows creeping across a room at dusk, and the people, so accustomed to ordinary days, notice perhaps a subtle change. A chill in the air, a dulling of sunlight, a strange taste in the wind. And still, life goes on. Children laugh. Families eat their meals, merchants trade, priests pray. Farmers plant. The world is about to shift. But for now, the rhythm continues. And we linger with it gently, slowly, as if savoring the calm before the storm. As the year 536 approached, the ordinary rhythms of life continued. The world seemed unchanged. The sun rose, warm and golden in the east. The air smelled of earth, of smoke from hearths, and the faint fragrance of wildflowers. People went about their days in slow motion, carrying out the tasks of living tasks. Both simple and essential, farms thrived, or at least seemed to. Wheat sprouted from tilled soil. Barley stretched upward toward the sun. Sheep grazed on green pastures, and cattle lowed in the distance. Children ran between cottages, their laughter filling quiet valleys. The rhythm of life so dependable, so ordinary, gave people a sense of safety. Even the weather played its part. Cool breezes swept over hills. Rains fell at gentle intervals. The seasons turned predictably, guiding planting, growth, and harvest. In cities, life was quieter, but no less ordered. Byzantine officials moved papers through marble corridors. Scribes copied text by candlelight, ink flowing slowly across delicate parchment. Merchants haggled over the price of wine, olive oil, and silk. And above all, the emperor watched, calculating, commanding, dreaming of conquest. People trusted the sky. They trusted the sun. They trusted the earth. And in this trust, they lived quietly, each day echoing the last. Subtle signs of change. Yet beneath this calm, the first hints of disturbance appeared. A morning when the sun seemed slightly dimmer. A harvest that did not yield as much as expected. A chill lingering longer than usual in the spring air. At first, these things were ignored. People explained them as unusual weather or a poor season. Farmers shrugged. Merchants whispered. Priests prayed a little more fervently. Children played as before, unaware of the subtle shifts. But the world was beginning to change. The veil of ash from a distant volcano, invisible to the naked eye, had begun to drift across the atmosphere. Particles high above the clouds blocked sunlight. Temperatures dipped ever so slightly. The ordinary rhythm of the year began to falter, and still life continued. People did not yet know the darkness approaching. They continued planting, harvesting, trading, loving, and praying. The sun remained visible, if fainter. The seasons still turned, and so we linger here, in this calm in the ordinary world, to feel fully the contrast of what was about to come. The fragile comfort of ordinary life. It is important to dwell on this ordinary life, because it was fragile. Because the comfort of routine is often what we take for granted. The people of 536 believed in stability and predictability. They relied on the earth, the seasons, the sun. They planned for the future, celebrated holidays, mourned the dead. They lived, and yet all of this, everything they held as normal, would soon be challenged. The dimming sun, the failing crops, the famine, and the plague. These things would arrive slowly, imperceptibly at first, and then with a relentless, unforgiving force. But for now, life continued. We pause here, in this moment, to savor the ordinary, to hear the soft sounds of the world before disaster. The wind in the trees, the clatter of pots, the lowing of animals, the laughter of children, the quiet, steady ticking of time, unbroken, for just a little longer. Welcome back to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight we begin a long and gentle journey, a journey into the shadows of the past, to explore a time often whispered about as the worst year to be alive. That year was 536, but before we enter the darkness of that year, let us linger. Let us take our time to understand the world that existed before the skies dimmed, before the sun vanished, before the long famine set in. Because history, like sleep, is not rushed. It flows slowly, like a stream at dusk, and as you listen, perhaps your eyelids grow heavy, as the story carries you deeper into quietness. Life before the darkness in the early 6th century, the world was fragile, but alive. In Europe, farms stretched across the countryside. Peasants worked the soil, bending their backs to the earth, trusting the rhythm of the seasons. Spring brought planting. Summer brought growth. Autumn, the harvest. Winter, the long wait by the fire. In Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire flourished under Emperor Justinian. Marble buildings glistened in the sun. Merchants carried silks, spices, and perfumes through bustling streets. Church bells and chants echoed across domes. It was an empire of order and ambition, but also one that depended deeply on food supplies from across the seas. Far away in China, the Northern Wei dynasty was recording its chronicles. In Ireland, monks quietly inscribed notes in their annals. In Syria, scholars observed the heavens, measuring the movement of stars and planets. Everywhere, people looked to the sky and trusted it would bring warmth, light, and life. The human rhythm. The people of 535 had no reason to expect disaster. Their world was full of hardship, yes, but also predictability. The rising sun, the changing seasons, the cycle of sowing and reaping. They prayed for good harvests. They feared drought or flood or war, but never did they imagine a world without the sun's bright warmth, a child in Gaul playing in a field of wheat, a farmer in Ireland sowing barley with rough, calloused hands, a merchant in Constantinople buying figs at the market, a monk in Italy copying manuscripts by candlelight. All of them trusted quietly that tomorrow would bring the familiar rhythm of day and night, and it did. Until 1 year later, when the rhythm broke, the calm before. Imagine lying in a meadow in the year 535. The sky is clear, the clouds drift lazily. Birdsong fills the air, the smell of grass rises in the warmth. The world feels timeless, ordinary. Now imagine not knowing that within a single year the world's climate would shudder, that a veil of ash and dust would cover the sky, that crops would wither, that hunger would spread, that plague would follow. But for now there was still peace. The year 535 passed without warning. The people of the world in their villages and cities had no idea what was about to come. They tilled their fields. They married, they prayed, they fought small wars, they told stories by firelight. Children laughed, priests preached, kings ruled. Life went on, and then came the year 536. Asterisk, asterisk, the year 535 had ended, and the new year dawned. 536 began, like any other year. The people of the world awoke to mornings filled with light. They went about their daily lives, plowing fields, baking bread, trading goods, tending animals. There was no sign, no whisper on the wind, of the great shadow that was about to fall, the shape of the world. To understand 536, let us gently sketch the map of the world. A world smaller than today's, yet vast to those who lived in it. In Europe, kingdoms rose from the ruins of Rome. The old empire had fallen, but its ghost lingered in crumbling roads, abandoned villas, and the Latin tongue still spoken in courts and churches. The Franks ruled in Gaul, the Ostrogoths held sway in Italy, Visigoths controlled Iberia, and in the far north, tribes of Saxons, Angles, and Jutes settled along cold coast. In Byzantium, the eastern half of Rome's inheritance, Emperor Justinian dreamed of reconquest. His armies prepared to retake Italy, to bring the Mediterranean once more under the eagle of Rome, his capital. Constantinople was the jewel of the East. Domes and mosaics glittered. Merchants bargained. Priests prayed. In incense-filled halls, farther east in Persia, the Sasanian Empire stood tall. It was Rome's old rival, its soldiers fierce, its kings ambitious, beyond. In India, the Gupta Empire had faded, and smaller kingdoms rose and fell in its place. In China, the Northern Way had fractured, and new dynasties rose, all carefully recording strange events in the heavens and the earth, and across the oceans. Unseen by Europe or Asia, the Maya built cities of stone in Central America. High pyramids rose from the jungle, kings ruled. Priests tracked the skies. The world was many worlds, each turning in its own rhythm, each unaware of the great veil of ash soon to link them all. Daily life. What did it mean, simply, to live in the early 6th century? For most, it meant farming. Sunrise to sunset, people bent over soil, digging, planting, harvesting, trusting the sun, trusting the rains. Bread was the heart of life. Grain, whether wheat, barley, or millet, was ground into flour, baked. Eaten daily, vegetables were seasonal, meat was rare. For many, life was simple, repetitive, and slow. Nights were long and dark, lit only by fire. Candles were precious. The stars stretched endless across the sky. In those stars, people saw gods, omens, and prophecies. And in those quiet nights, they felt the comfort of a sky that had always been there. Unchanging, dependable, the silence. Before the storm, it is easy, now, with hindsight, to imagine the people of 535 standing on the edge of disaster. But they did not know. To them, life was ordinary. The rhythm of the year had not yet broken. A farmer in Gaul sharpened his plow. A shepherd in Syria led his flock. A fisherman in the Aegean cast his net. A monk in Ireland illuminated manuscripts with slow, careful strokes, and the sun rose and set. The moon waxed and waned. The seasons turned, but deep beneath the earth, pressure was building. A mountain of fire far away, perhaps in Iceland or in Central America, was preparing to erupt, preparing to send smoke and ash higher than the clouds, higher than the storms, into the stratosphere itself. The people of the world, going about their simple tasks, did not know it. But the sky itself was about to change. Trust in the heavens for ancient peoples. The sky was not simply background. It was the stage of life. It was a source of order and meaning. Farmers planted by the sun. Sailors steered by the stars. Priests measured holy days by the phases of the moon. The heavens were constant. Even when wars raged, even when empires fell, the sun still rose, the moon still shone, the stars still wheeled overhead. And so, when that rhythm broke in 536, when the sun dimmed and would not brighten, the shock was greater than words could capture. It was as if the very bones of the world had shifted, as if time itself had faltered, but that is for later. For now, we remain in the calm, in the steady rhythm of life before the veil. A slow approach history often speaks in sudden turns. But real life is slower. Disaster creeps. Change comes step by step, day by day. So too, in 535 and 536, there was no trumpet to announce the worst year. No messenger to warn the people. The darkness arrived quietly. It began with whispers, a pale sun, a strange dimness, a chill in the summer air, but that belongs to the story ahead. For now, in our long, slow journey, we linger a little longer. In the world as it was, the peaceful fields, the glittering cities, the quiet nights, the endless rhythm of ordinary days. The year pressed onward, and the dim sun did not brighten. Day after day, the world remained gray, the air remained cool, the harvests remained poor. The faint hope people clung to began to fade. In villages, the mood shifted. People no longer spoke of the sun as a passing event. They spoke of it as a lasting change. Farmers quietly admitted that yields were failing. Families began to plan for a leaner future. The decline of harvest fields that once yielded abundance now produced meager crops. A wheat field, normally golden, now appeared pale and thin. Grain heads were small, often hollow. Barley, too, grew stunted and weak. Vegetables such as turnips, beans, and peas struggled in the chilled soil. Fruit orchards bore little. Apples remained small and sour. Grapes, normally plump, failed to ripen fully, leaving winemakers with thin, sour vintages. Honey production fell as bees, disturbed by the cold, moved less and foraged less. Each loss compounded. Food was the lifeblood of every community. Without it, unease grew. The markets in towns and cities, markets reflected the shortages. Stalls once filled with variety now displayed sparse goods. Bakers charged more for bread. Vegetables arrived in smaller bundles. Meat became rarer as animals grew weaker in the cold and required more feed. Buyers haggled anxiously, though merchants had little to offer. Conversations in marketplaces grew subdued. Instead of the lively chatter of past years, there were quiet exchanges, grim nods, and silent calculations of how long supplies would last. Social shifts. The dim sun changed social rhythms. Feasts and celebrations were fewer. Communal gatherings, once filled with music, turned somber. Stories by firelight often returned to the same question: why had the sun grown weak? Some whispered of punishment from the divine. Others suspected natural cycles beyond understanding. But the uncertainty itself weighed heavily. The lack of explanation left people uneasy, restless, yet subdued. Communities leaned on each other. Families shared food when possible. Neighbors offered labor to those struggling. Still, even cooperation could not replace what the sun once provided. Freely, emotional fatigue, the emotional toll deepened. Humans, so dependent on light, felt drained. The constant grayness dulled energy. Children became quieter, less playful. Adults carried themselves with weary resolve. Laughter grew rare. Religious leaders urged faith. Scholars urged patience. But patience brought no warmth, and faith did not fill empty granaries. People adjusted their routines. They went to bed earlier, they woke later. They conserved energy. As though instinctively preparing for leaner times ahead, the encroaching hunger by late 536, the first real hunger arrived. It was not yet widespread famine, but the signs were undeniable. Meals grew smaller. Families cut portions to stretch supplies. Children ate before adults. The poor begged more often, as wealthier households guarded their own stores. Hunger carried more than an empty stomach. It brought weakness, it slowed labor, it dimmed concentration. And in the dim sunlight, hunger seemed even heavier, as though the very sky had joined in pressing down upon humanity. The global mirror far from Europe, the same patterns repeated. In China, chronicles recorded cold summers, failed harvests, and unusual atmospheric haze. In the Middle East, crop yields shrank. In Ireland, records spoke of a failure of bread. Each region experienced the same shadow, though unaware. It stretched across the world. This was not a local misfortune. It was planetary. The earth itself seemed to sigh. As the dim sun reminded humanity of its fragility, as the seasons turned, hope for recovery faded. The gray sun lingered, refusing to brighten. The cool air remained, and the earth yielded little. What began as poor harvests now deepened into scarcity. And scarcity edged ever closer to famine. The turning point in villages, granaries stood half empty. Farmers had saved seed for planting, but that seed often went into cooking pots instead. The careful balance between eating today and planting for tomorrow collapsed. In towns, merchants who once sold sacks of grain now rationed by handfuls. Markets, once noisy, grew subdued. Instead of bargaining for the best price, people begged. For any price? Each coin carried less meaning when there was little food left to buy. The arrival of hunger no longer lingered quietly. It became a daily companion. Stomachs ached, heads grew light, bodies weakened. Children cried more often, and the elderly grew frailer by the day. Meals shrank further. Broths replaced bread. Roots and herbs became staples, bitter though they were. Some boiled bark to stave off the emptiness. Others ground weeds into coarse flour. The taste of true bread, golden and full, became a memory whispered at firesides. The shadow of starvation slowly, deaths began. Not in great waves, not yet, but in quiet, steady numbers. The weakest went first, children too young to endure, the elderly whose bodies could not fight, the sick who had no strength to spare. Funerals became simpler, for there was little energy for ceremony. Communities buried their dead quietly, often at dawn beneath the pale gray sky. The role of trade in wealthier regions, trade offered a small reprieve. Merchants carried food from one land to another, though even those supplies grew thin. Caravans arrived with half the usual loads. Ships carried less grain, their holds far emptier than before. Prices soared. The wealthy could still purchase, but the poor found themselves locked out of survival. Inequality widened and hunger sharpened that divide. Hoarding and fear with scarcity came suspicion. Some families hoarded food, guarding it as though it were treasure. Neighbors whispered of hidden stores. Accusations stirred quarrels. In some villages, guards watched over communal granaries. In others, theft crept silently in the night. Trust, once strong in tight-knit communities, weakened under the weight of hunger. The quiet despair emotionally. The dim sun weighed heavier than ever. The endless gray skies, the cool, damp air, the weakened bodies, all pressed down on human spirits. Hope became fragile. Conversations grew short, filled with silence more than words. People rose later, worked slower, slept longer, as though conserving both energy and will. Even music faded. Songs that once filled homes now sounded faint, sometimes replaced with prayer, sometimes with silence. The world in 536, and so it was. Across continents, in Europe, in Asia, in the Middle East, in the far reaches of lands connected by faint trade routes, the same story unfolded. Dim sunlight, cool summers, failed harvests, hunger, fear, and the slow, steady approach of famine. The earth itself seemed cloaked in shadow, and humanity stumbled forward, struggling to endure what felt like the end of light. By the close of the year, the pattern was unmistakable. The dim sun had not brightened. The skies remained gray, the fields remained poor, and the hunger, once creeping, now spread openly. Famine unfolds. Villages began to run out of stored food. Granaries, once locked and guarded, stood bare. Farmers who had already stretched their stores thin now faced the cold truth of nothing left. Communities that once shared now struggled to do so. When everyone had little, there was little to offer. Famine had begun in earnest. The toll of starvation. The human body, deprived of food, weakens slowly, muscles thin. Energy fades, bones show through the skin. Illness arrives easily, for hunger invites disease. In 536, these patterns became familiar. Children weakened visibly. Mothers gave the last of their portions to them, but even that sacrifice could not always save the young. The elderly, too, suffered greatly. Their resilience, already strained by age, was no match for empty tables, and so, in many places, the Graveyards grew, the role of faith faced with such suffering, people turned to faith. Churches filled, even as bellies remained empty. Priests spoke of endurance, of divine tests, of the promise of future relief, but faith, though it offered comfort, did not restore crops to the fields. Prayers rose beneath a gray sky, and still. The dim sun gave no warmth. Some believed punishment was at hand. Others sought meaning in prophecy. But many simply bowed their heads, accepting the silence of heaven, leadership, and authority. Kings, lords, and local leaders struggled as well. They taxed less, for there was less to collect. They rationed food stores, though those too dwindled. Some rulers imported grain where possible, but trade routes had grown unreliable. The shortages were not confined to one land, but stretched across continents. Even those in power felt the strain, and their subjects judged them by how they endured it. Communities under straining towns, the sight of beggars became constant. The weak lined streets, hands outstretched, eyes hollow. Some were given scraps, but scraps could not sustain life. Others turned away, for they had none to spare. Rural communities fared no better. When neighbors ran out of food, they visited others in search of help. But when each household was empty, there was no help to give. The silence of winter of 536 arrived with little light, little warmth, and little food. Snow fell faintly in some places, but even in regions where snow did not fall, the air felt heavy, the nights longer than memory recalled. The dim sun of daytime barely lifted spirits. Darkness, both real and metaphorical, settled over entire regions. People whispered less. Songs faded further. A hush fell upon humanity, as though the world itself had grown tired. A planet in shadow from Europe to Asia, from the Middle East to distant lands across seas. The same conditions persisted: the gray skies, the cool air, the crop failures, the hunger, the despair. All of humanity, scattered though it was, shared in this single shadow. As the months of 536 unfolded, the pale sun became more pronounced. Its weak light reached the earth, but offered little warmth. Shadows were faint and diffuse, failing to give shape to the world as they had in previous years. People noticed the difference immediately, though they could not fully comprehend it. Farmers became the first to sense the true severity of the change. Fields that once produced abundant grain now struggled. Wheat grew slowly, barley thin and weak. Rice paddies yielded less than expected. Gardens produced vegetables small and malformed. The rhythm of planting and harvest, the heartbeat of human life, was disrupted. Global observations: the veil of volcanic ash did not respect borders. In Europe, crops withered and famine whispers grew louder. In the Middle East, grain and fruit failed in familiar ways, forcing merchants to travel farther for trade. In China, unusual summer snow and reports of cold weather troubled local officials and scholars. Even distant observers in the Americas likely experienced subtle climatic shifts, though records are sparse. Chroniclers described a world shrouded in gray. The sun appeared like a faint, weak disk, as one monk recorded. The air was colder, seasonal cycles faltered. People began to sense that life would not be as predictable as before. Daily life under dim light. Imagine a family waking in a village. In Gaul, the morning sun rises, but its warmth does not reach them. Children shiver as they dress. Farmers pull on heavier clothing to work the fields. Animals graze more slowly, moving cautiously in the muted light. Bakers prepare bread, but grain is scarce. Merchants notice smaller quantities of fruits and vegetables arriving in markets. The air carries a damp chill, even on days that should be warm. Even the smallest routines are affected. The dim light makes it harder to see, slows work, and introduces an undercurrent of anxiety. Communities gather more frequently by fires, seeking warmth and comfort. Conversations often turn to the dim sun and the strange cold. Questions rise. Why is the world different? Will it improve? Answers are scarce, and hope, once abundant, begins to waver. Psychological and emotional effects. The sun's dimming is not merely physical. It is emotional. Humans are attuned to light. Pale, weak light influences mood, energy, and perception. People feel lethargy. Children play less energetically. Adults become quieter, contemplative, perhaps even fearful. Priests and scholars attempt explanations. Some interpret it as a sign of divine anger. Others record it scientifically, noting patterns in the sky. Yet no explanation comforts ordinary people as effectively as the warm sun once did. Early warnings of famine as crops struggled. The first signs of hunger appeared. Farmers noticed smaller yields. Villagers began storing more grain, rationing daily meals. Markets reflected scarcity. Prices rose. Trade routes strained under the pressure of reduced agricultural output. Though famine had not yet spread widely, the seeds were sown. Human life, so delicately balanced on the cycle of planting and harvest, began to tilt. Each day of dimmed sunlight meant slower growth, weaker crops, and a creeping sense of dread. Communities respond despite uncertainty. Communities adapted. People shared what they had. Families rationed food. Villagers advised each other on planting strategies. Faith provided comfort, though it did not halt the failing crops. The world was resilient, yet fragile. Ordinary life continued, but with a sense of tension beneath the surface. Children laughed less freely. Workers moved slower. Even the songs of birds seemed quieter in the dim light. Asterisk as the months wore on, the pale light of the sun persisted. Days were dim, cool, and heavy. Shadows grew soft, indistinct. The warmth people had relied upon seemed to slip away. Even on the brightest days, the world felt muted, gray, and quiet. Farmers noticed their crops struggled more with each passing week. Wheat remained short and thin. Barley produced small, shriveled heads. Vegetables failed to ripen properly. Fruit. Trees produced sparse, undersized yields. Each failed harvest brought concern. Families ate sparingly, rationing what little food remained. Merchants noticed shortages in markets. Communities whispered about poor crops and strange weather. The spread of cold, the dim sunlight also brought a subtle chill. Summers felt cooler, winters lingered longer. Snow appeared in regions unaccustomed to it. Rivers froze earlier in the season and thawed later than usual. The cold slowed daily life. Farmers spent more time tending fires than fields. Animals moved more slowly, eating more to maintain warmth. Children dressed in heavier clothing, moving carefully in the chill. Even in cities, the gray sun was noticeable. Streets felt colder. Water and wells and fountains cooled more quickly. Merchants adjusted hours and stock to account for reduced daylight. Life seemed heavier, slower, more subdued. The psychological toll the sun's dimming affected more than it affected humans. People became quieter, reflective, sometimes melancholic. Children laughed less freely. Work seemed more exhausting. Even sleep was subtly altered, with nights longer and darker than memory recalled. Religious leaders spoke of omens. Priests interpreted the dim sun as divine displeasure, urging more prayers and offerings. Monks recorded the phenomena carefully, sometimes with anxiety, noting the unusual patterns for future generations. Yet ordinary people, though noticing changes, had few explanations. They carried on with daily life, struggling to maintain hope amidst the subtle despair creeping into each day. Early famine in food. Scarcity. The struggling crops soon translated into tangible scarcity. Grain stores, previously sufficient, began to shrink. Families began rationing portions. Bakers baked smaller loaves. Merchants adjusted prices as food became harder to obtain. Villagers turned to less desirable foods. Leaves, roots, and forage plants supplemented meals. Hunger became a quiet presence in homes and communities. It did not yet dominate, but it was growing, creeping through daily life like a shadow. Global scope of change. The dimming sun was not local, it was global. In Europe, the northern regions felt the chill more acutely. In the Mediterranean, crops failed more slowly, but the pall of gray sunlight still affected growth. In the Middle East, rivers ran cooler, fields produced less, and markets strained. In China, scholars recorded unusual solar behavior and cooler than normal weather. The world was linked by trade and climate, though few understood the connection. The ash veil traveled thousands of miles, subtly affecting people and animals far from the eruption. Yet each community, unaware of the global cause, struggled as though it were their own misfortune alone. Daily life in the pale sun. Imagine waking each day in this dim world. A farmer rises before dawn. The air is cool, even for summer. The soil feels heavier, damp, reluctant. The farmer plants seeds carefully, hoping they will grow despite the dim sunlight. A child in a village notices the gray light filtering through windows. She dresses quietly, shivers slightly, and helps with morning chores. Her laughter is softer than before. In the city, merchants open shops under the muted sun. Buyers move slowly through streets. People talk in hushed tones about smaller harvests and colder days. Life continues, but with caution, quietness, and underlying concern. Asterisk. The year dragged onward, and though the calendar marked time, the sky itself seemed frozen in shadow. What had begun as dim light had become a world where people wondered if true sunlight would ever return. The peak of famine by now. Famine was widespread. Entire regions faced shortages so severe that survival became the only thought. Markets stood nearly empty. The few goods available were priced beyond imagination. Coins became less useful than favors, promises, or raw barter. In villages, people shared when they could, but hunger broke down even generosity. A crust of bread, once common, became as precious as gold. The breaking of communities' trust within communities grew thin. Neighbors once bound together now eyed one another with suspicion. Whispers spread of hoarded stores. Accusations led to quarrels. Quarrels led to violence. Some families locked their doors at night, guarding what little they had. Others fled villages altogether, wandering in search of food or hope. Communities that had survived together for generations found themselves weakened from within. Illness and weakness. Hunger bred weakness, and weakness opened the door to illness. Diseases that might once have been mild now proved deadly. With bodies frail, even small fevers claimed lives. Children coughed and wasted away. The elderly slipped quietly into death. Adults, too, found themselves unable to recover from even the simplest sickness. The graveyards filled. The quiet processions to burial grounds became as common as the toll of church bells. Faith at the edge of the churches swelled, but faith itself strained. Priests called the famine a test. They urged patience, endurance, trust. But the people, hearing prayers unanswered, began to waver. Some clung tighter to belief. Others turned bitter, questioning the silence of heaven. A few abandoned their faith entirely, drifting into quiet despair. Even holy men admitted, in whispers, that the endless gray unsettled their own hearts. The cold of another winter. When another winter came, the hardship deepened. Fires burned low, for even wood grew scarce in some regions. Meals shrank to almost nothing. Some nights passed without food at all. And still the sky remained dim. The faint, weak sun of day bled quickly into the darkness of night. Time itself seemed heavy. Days blurred together. Months stretched endlessly. And the question grew louder in every heart: would this shadowed sun ever return? A world brought low by the end of 536. The world felt smaller, weaker, and quieter. Trade had slowed. Villages had thinned. Families had lost members. Communities had grown suspicious. Even the strongest rulers felt their power shaken by hunger. Their voices less steady, their promises less convincing. It was not only famine. It was the sense that the order of the world itself had cracked the threshold of darkness, and so humanity stood at a threshold. A year had passed in near shadow. The world was colder, hungrier, sadder. And still, the gray skies gave no hint of change. What lay ahead was uncertain. Would the light return? Would crops grow again? Or had the earth truly entered a long, slow decline? No one could answer, no one knew. But every person alive in 536 felt the same heavy truth. They were living in a year unlike any other, a year that seemed to stretch into eternity, the year that would later be remembered as the worst year to be alive.